I had accepted the Inquisitor's offer. In truth, what choice did I have? I moved my few possessions from the reeking hostelry that very evening. My new master followed with his on the next day. A silent stream of hooded servitors bringing in crate after crate of arcane equipment, data slates bound in human skin, and specimen jars containing things that squirmed in the dark. Our new residence was a suite of HAB units at Sector 221B Obscurus Lane, a spire level far enough from the Underhive to be considered civilized, yet close enough to feel the thrum of its depravity. By some writ of his authority, Blackstone had requisitioned the entire floor. The rooms were spacious, with broad, grime-streaked windows of reinforced plasteel that looked out upon the endless, smog-choked canyons of Hive Sibellus. By day it was a vista of grey metal and brown, toxic clouds, a world without a sun. By night it was a sea of glittering lights and distant, silent flashes from the spire-top walls of the noble houses, a constant, beautiful reminder of the Hive's endless, casual violence. Once we had settled down, I began to study my new companion and the strange, new rhythm of my life. He was a creature of intense, almost manic energy, followed by periods of profound, death-like torpor he called the Black Bile. For weeks he would be a whirlwind, a force of nature that filled our sanctum with the foul stench of Xenos ichor analysis and the crackle of overloaded data looms. He would work for cycles on end without sleep or sustenance, his lean frame powered by some unseen inner fire. During these times our rooms would be a chaotic landscape of his obsessions. Strange, non-Euclidean artifacts laid out on the floor, detailed anatomical drawings of alien creatures pinned to the walls, and the air thick with the ozone of some dangerous alchemical experiment. Then, just as suddenly, the storm would pass. A reaction would seize him, and for days on end he would lie upon the synth-leather sofa in our sitting room, hardly uttering a word, his eyes fixed on the stained ceiling, lost in some inner void I could not comprehend. He would not eat, he would not speak. The only sound in the sanctum would be the mournful, droning dirges he played on a strange, 9-stringed catgut viol, a sound that seemed to echo the endless misery of the Hive itself. It was during these times that the true weight of his knowledge, the burden of the horrors he investigated, seemed to settle upon him. My own days took on a new, rigid purpose. I was his chronicler, his chirurgeon, his quartermaster, and when needed, his man-at-arms. My mornings were spent organizing the chaotic flood of data he produced, transcribing his muttered observations from audio logs, cross-referencing obscure heretical texts with planetary census data, and trying to bring a semblance of order to a collection of data slates that seemed to actively resist it. My afternoons were for the maintenance of our tools. I learned the rites of cleansing for his Inferno pistol, a beautiful and terrifying weapon that hummed with a caged fury. I field stripped and reconsecrated my own las pistol until the movements were as natural as breathing. The muscle memory of the guard was a comfort in the strange new world of shadows and whispers. His visitors were a strange and often terrifying collection. I learned to recognize the different footfalls on the staircase, the different chimes of the door servitor. There was the quick, nervous tapping of the administratum adept, a sallow-faced man who would deliver sealed data slates and refuse to make eye contact, his body radiating a palpable fear. There was the heavy, floor-shaking tread of the Ogren bodyguard who sometimes accompanied a shadowy figure from the spire nobility, the Ogren standing silent and immense in the corner of the room, his presence a constant, brooding threat. And there were the whispers, the informants from the Underhive, men and women with augmetic eyes that clicked and whirred, their faces a roadmap of scars and desperation, who would trade fragments of truth for a handful of thrones or a promise of the Inquisitor's protection. I learned more of the Hive's dark heart in those first few months than I had in a lifetime in the Guard. I learned of spy politics that were as brutal as any trench war, of forbidden cults that festered in the deepest sumps, and of the constant, unending struggle between the forces of order and the chaos that threatened to swallow everything. One morning cycle, while Blackstone was in a grip of one of his black moods, I picked up a data slate from the table to distract myself from the mournful drone of his vial. The title was The Book of Life, an academic journal for those who study the nature of man. The article I read on the art of deduction was a remarkable mixture of shrewdness and absurdity. The writer claimed that by a man's fingernails, his coat sleeve, his boots, a man's entire history could be plainly revealed. A piece of supreme nonsense, I cried, slapping the data slate down upon the table. I have never heard such rubbish in my life. It is evidently by some armchair theorist who is evolving these neat little paradoxes in the seclusion of his study. It is not practical. Oh, but it is intensely practical, Blackstone remarked calmly from the sofa, the drone of his vial finally ceasing. The sudden silence was more startling than the music had been, so practical that I depend upon it for my function in this galaxy. So what function is that? I asked, unable to hide the irritation in my voice. I have a trade of my own. I suppose I'm the only one in the galaxy. I'm a consulting inquisitor. He sat up, the fire returning to his eyes, the black bile receding like a tide. Here in Hive Sibellus we have a tolerable force of enforcers. They are effective instruments of blunt force. They can pacify a hab block riot, hunt down a sump ganger, or execute a dissident. But when they are faced with a true puzzle, a crime that has subtlety, a heresy of the mind rather than the fist, they are lost. They come to me, and I manage to put them on the right scent. He steepled his long, thin fingers. They lay all the evidence before me, and I am generally able, by the help of my knowledge of the history of heresy, to set them straight. There's a strong clan resemblance about misdeeds, Vorn. If you have all the details of 1,000 heresies at your finger ends, it is an odd thing if you cannot unravel the 1,001st. Proctor Valerius and Proctor Krieg are the pick of a bad lot. Valerius is obsessed with spy politics and the letter of the Lex Imperialis, but he cannot see the spirit of a crime. Krieg is a brute, a fine tool for kicking in doors, but he thinks every problem can be solved with a shock maul. They have their knives into one another too. They are as jealous as a pair of hive gangers. They will be here this cycle, both of them, you may be sure of it. I was still pondering his incredible self-confidence when, true to his prediction, the sharp electronic chime of our door servitor announced a visitor. It was not the shuffling of an informant or the heavy tread of an Ogren. It was the crisp official rap of an Imperial agent. Adept of the Enforcers, my lords, the servitor intoned, his voice a polite, metallic rasp. He bears a high-priority missive. Blackstone gestured for me to open the door. An Enforcer's adept stood in the hallway, his grey, high-collared uniform immaculate, but his face was pale and slick with sweat. He carried a data slate in a trembling hand and refused to look past me to where the Inquisitor sat. The fear of Blackstone's office was a palpable thing. A message for you, my Lord Inquisitor, the adept stammered, offering the slate. From Proctor Enforcer Valerius. It is urgent. Blackstone took the slate, his eyes scanning the glowing text. I saw his nostrils flare, just once. A predator catching a scent on the wind. Ah, he said, a flicker of genuine interest in his expression. A bad business during the night cycle. In the abandoned Lauriston tenements, sub-level Tertius. A man found dead, no wounds. The hab block was empty. He looked up from the slate, a dark fire in his eyes. He requires my assistance. The proctor is waiting in a ground car below, my lord, the adept said, already backing away down the corridor, as if fleeing a predator's den. Blackstone turned to me, his torpor completely burned away, replaced by that familiar, terrifying energy. Vorn, you may come if you have nothing better to do. I have nothing to do, I answered, a thrill of purpose running through me. Then fetch your sidearm, he said, and your Medicaid kit. I suspect this will be a matter requiring a more delicate touch than that which the Enforcers can provide. The ground car that awaited us was a standard Enforcer patrol vehicle, a blocky grey slab of armor and reinforced plasteel. Proctor Enforcer Valerius, the tall, haughty man from the message, sat inside, his face a mask of impatience. He was the very picture of a spire-born official, his uniform immaculate, his bearing stiff and condescending. He barely acknowledged me, his gaze fixed on the Inquisitor. "A strange affair, Inquisitor," he said, his voice clipped and precise. "The body of a man was found in an empty, locked hab unit. He is an off-worlder of some standing. There are no signs of a struggle, no wounds, and yet there was blood and a message written in blood upon the wall." "And the message?" Blackstone asked, his eyes already alight with a predatory gleam as he settled into the vehicle. "A single glyph," Valerius replied, his voice low, "heretical in nature, unrecognized by our lex mechanics." The mystery was afoot. As the ground car lurched into the flow of transit, I felt a surge of energy I had not known since my days in the Guard. The monotonous grey of my convalescence was finally being replaced by the sharp, vivid colors of a new campaign. We descended. The journey from our relatively clean sector on Obscurus Lane into the grimy depths of the Lauriston sector was a physical and spiritual transition. The smog thickened, pressing in on the armored windows, the distant lights of the upper spire vanishing into a brown, toxic haze. The air that filtered through the car's scrubbers grew thick with the stench of chemical runoff and nutrient vat overflow. The transitways became more crowded, a chaotic river of battered haulers, rickety auto carriages, and the endless, shuffling tide of humanity. Faceless figures in grey work shifts stared at our official vehicle with a mixture of fear and resentment. I saw a patrol of enforcers brutally subdue a sump ganger, the cracks of their shock mauls a sharp counterpoint to the endless droning sermons that blared from public foxcasters mounted on every corner. This was the real Hive, the grinding, miserable machine that lay beneath the gilded shell of the spires. The Lauriston tenements were a dismal-looking block, a monument to decay, its plasteel shutters sealed and its face grimy with the filth of the Hive. A small crowd of loungers and off-duty workers had gathered, their pale faces upturned, their expressions apathetic but curious. I recognized the grim armored forms of the enforcers, who had formed a cordon around the entrance. A squat, pugnacious man with a scarred face and a bionic eye that glowed with a dull red light was arguing with Valerius as we arrived. "This is my precinct, Valerius," he barked, his voice a gravelly roar. "Proctor Krieg has jurisdiction. I don't need some spire-born fop telling me how to investigate a simple murder." "Jurisdiction ends where heresy begins, Krieg," Valerius sneered, gesturing with a contemptuous flick of his hand at the hablock. "The presence of an unknown glyph elevates this beyond our pay grade, which is why the Inquisitor's here." Blackstone ignored their squabbling, as if they were buzzing flies. "The body," he asked, his voice cutting through their posturing like a scalpel. "Is within," Krieg grumbled, clearly resentful of the intrusion, but powerless to stop it. He gestured to the open door with his shock maul. "Nothing has been touched." We entered. The hab unit was dark and foul-smelling, the air thick with the scent of stale sweat, cheap amasec, and something else, a faint, coppery tang that I, as a Medicae, recognized instantly as old blood. A single lumen strip flickered erratically overhead, casting long, dancing shadows that made the room feel as if it were alive and breathing. In the center of the room, sprawled on the grimy floor, lay the body of a man. His fine off-world robes were disheveled, and his eyes were wide with a look of utter, soul-shattering terror. There were no wounds upon him, no signs of violence, yet on the floor around him, small, dark spatters of blood could be seen. Blackstone moved like a predator. He did not walk, he flowed through the room. A black-robed phantom, his eyes darting everywhere at once, absorbing every detail. He seemed to enter a state of pure, focused intellect, the bickering enforcers and myself forgotten entirely. He knelt, his long, thin fingers hovering over the body, but never touching it. He sniffed the air. He examined the dust on the man's boots. Then he pointed to the far wall. There, scrawled in what was unmistakably blood, was a single, sharp, angular glyph I did not recognize. It was not a symbol from any known cult or gang. It seemed to pulse with a malevolence all of its own in the flickering light. "The fools will say it is a random mark," Blackstone murmured, a strange fire in his eyes. "They will search their data looms for a gang sign, a minor cultist's tag. They are wrong." He turned to the two enforcers, his gaze sharp enough to make them both flinch. "This is not a simple murder. This is something else entirely. Gentlemen," he said, a cold smile on his lips, "this is a study in scarlet." This concludes the second part of my meeting with Inquisitor Blackstone. More will follow shortly. You may append your own approved commentary to the record below. The Order Chronos is ever watchful.